your job is to read this section in chapter 23, jot down some notes, and even possibly take a shot at writing 2 or 3 paragraphs about this and have it ready to go, so that when you get your final exam, you can just copy and paste it or type it in again, depending on what you want to do. Now, the argument for rules is that if you have rules, then the consumers and businesses, then the consumer and the business person are in a position to know what's going to happen. Their expectations are set. They know exactly what's going to happen from the Federal Reserve. They know how much inflation there's going to be. They know how much money is going to be in the money supply. There's not going to be any surprises. And people like it when there aren't surprises. And so they have that nice, steady Federal Reserve control over a monetary system that's very stable. And the U.S. money supply and monetary system are renowned for their stability. So for many, many years, they follow the rules. They use the Taylor rule. They've used the Taylor rule in the past. The Taylor rule was developed by an economist at Stanford named John Taylor. And it's a very sophisticated formula, so you're not going to have to learn it or memorize it. I tell you, I haven't myself. I know that there are a few people who have, but we can look it up anytime we want. So the Taylor rule is basically focused on inflation, managing inflation. And it uses a number of different variables to determine how much to increase or to decrease the money supply. Now, a very simple way of looking at it would be, well, if the population increased by 2%, we would need 2% more money just to stay where we are. And if we want to increase it by inflation by 2%, we would have to add 2% to inflate it by 2%. So then the question is, well, then what about GDP? Well, if GDP goes up 2%, we would have to increase the money supply by another 2%, so 6%. So you can see how that would work. It's way more sophisticated than that, but you get the idea. The other argument is, well, maybe we shouldn't use rules. Maybe we should be using a discretionary approach. Allow these very intelligent economists and bankers to make the decision about how much money we should need based on the situation. Most of the time, they'll probably follow the rule, but there might be times when they want to change it. Well, that's what happened. So when we got into this last mess with the housing crisis, then they decided to throw the rules out and print an enormous amount of money. They basically doubled the money supply. Now, why did they do that? Well, they needed to bail out the banks. And so the banks needed to receive a lot of cash because they had a whole bunch of bad mortgages. So the Federal Reserve printed twice as much money as we had, about $1.5 trillion. And they took that money and they bought the bad mortgages from the banks. So the Federal Reserve now is holding $1.7 trillion in basically foreclosed houses on its books. It also has another 1.7 trillion printed in new currency on its books. Now, that would normally cause an enormous amount of inflation, because if you double the money supply, you'd probably see about 100% inflation. So what did the Federal Reserve do so that we didn't have the inflation? It introduced a new idea: start paying interest on reserves. So it offered a high enough interest rate that the banks, this money that the banks received from the Federal Reserve, they then gave back to the Federal Reserve to hold on deposit and make earn interest. And so that's where it sits. It sits at the Federal Reserve. But we now have twice as much money in the money supply. So that's the idea behind discretionary. Well, right now, with the pandemic, the government's decided that it wants to give $2 trillion out to the American people. Well, where does that money come from? That money has to be borrowed. So the Federal Reserve is printing $2 trillion worth of Federal Reserve notes and selling it. But then the Federal Reserve will end up buying those notes and requiring the banks to put more money on reserve with them, or else we'll see massive inflation. How long can this go on? Well, it's something to be debated. And so these two ideas behind discretionary and rules are one area where there's a lot of disagreement among economists.